Hi friends, today I am going to explain the third part of the classical theory or classical theory of output, income and employment. So we already discussed in the previous classes first part and second part. In the first part we already discussed about that classical theory of assumptions of the classical theory, and in the part 2 we already discussed about that components of the classical theory like says market law, wage price flexibility, and interest rate flexibility and money market equilibrium. But now in the third part we can focus on the criticisms of the classical theory. So this classical theory was strongly criticized by the many economists, mainly John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression of the 1930s, because the classical economists strongly believed on the full employment and self-adjusting uh, self-adjusting economy and long-run analysis. So many unrealistic things the classical theory it has. Therefore, this theory has been criticized. So today we can one by one we can discuss what are the main criticisms of the classical theory. Okay. So first one is unrealistic assumption of full employment. We know classical economists strongly believed full employment. The full employment exists in the economy. There is no any unemployment. Suppose if any unemployment is there, that is a temporary or voluntary unemployment. That is not any involuntary unemployment. Always full employment exists in the economy. This is the classical economist thought and strongly believed. But in the real world, we can't see full employment in any economy. Every economy is facing unemployment problem. Therefore, the classical theory has been criticized. One thing. The another next point criticized is wage flexibility does not work in reality. Yes, wage flexibility. Through cutting the wage rate, full employment can be created as per the classical economist. But in the real world, it won't work. If any suppose cut the wage rate, the trade unions will protest against the company or against the reducing the cutting rate. And even also, and governments fixed some minimum wage rates. So we can't cut the wage rate of the laborers in the real world, especially where governments are ruling. And mainly the Keynes argued that suppose we cut the wage rate, the demand also will be reduced for the goods and services, and consumption reduced, and even also it will affect on the production and again create the unemployment situation. Therefore, the for this purpose the classical theory has been criticized. The next one is says law is unrealistic. The classical economists strongly believed supply creates its own demand. First start the production, and production generates the income, and income creates the demand for goods and services. This is the classical economics thought. But in the real world, mainly the Keynes argued, in the economy, demand deficiency is there. Supply always not, it does not create its own demand because of demand deficiency. Suppose a consumer or individual, when he earns that income, he won't spend full amount of money. Maybe he will save the money, or he will keep in cash in as hand instead of spending. Then consumption will reduce, demand will reduce, and unsold production. How that supply creates its own demand. Therefore, in the real world, it won't work because every economy is facing the demand deficiency. Therefore, the classical theory has been criticized for this purpose. The next point is savings and investment are not automatically equal. As per the classical economist, saving equal to investment through the interest rate. Okay. So mainly saving and investment depends on the interest rate. But in the real world, saving and investment influence on the other factors also, not only in the interest rate. The Keynes argued not only that saving and investment depends on interest rate as well as income. Saving depends on income and investment depends on some business expectations. So therefore, the interest rate always, it won't create the equality between saving and investment. So this is it is one of the criticisms of the classical theory, that saving always not equal to investment through the interest rate. And next point is money is not neutral. Money is not neutral. As per the classical economists, supply of money only influence on the prices, not influence on the output and employment. Already we discussed in the previous classes, no? So only money is the influence on the prices, not on the output and employment. But in the real world, mainly the Keynes argued, the supply of money affects the interest rate, and interest rate affects the investment, and investment affects output, income and employment. Therefore, the supply of money is very important in the economy. We can't take easily neglect the supply of money. The supply of money is affecting on output, income and employment. Therefore, the classical theory was criticized for this point. The next point is economy is not always self-adjusting. As per the classical economist, economy, especially in the long run, always it is self-adjusting. It is automatically adjust in the long run. If any unemployment is there, it will automatically adjust in the long run. But Keynes argued, in the long run, we all are dead. Okay, and not any self-adjusting, it won't work in the real. So every factor is influenced on the internal and external factors. Therefore, that is not self-adjusted. That's why that classical theory has been criticized on this point. The next point is government intervention is necessary. As per the classical economist, government will not interfere in the economic activities. The government duty is only for the maintaining rules and order. Okay, this is the classical economist thought and strongly believed this one. But in the real world, government interfere in the economic activities. Our government interference is very necessary in the economy. Government creates demand through spending the money. For example, government spend money or invest money on the constructing road, bridge or any basic infrastructure. It will leads to create income, employment and production, demand, consumption. Therefore, the government interfere is very important in the every economy. But classical economists avoided the government interfere in the economy. Therefore, the classical theory has been criticized on this point. The last one is perfect competition is unrealistic. The classical economist strongly believed perfect competition market in the economy, in the product market and labor market. But in the real world, perfect competition market will not work, because in the real world, monopoly or monopolistic markets are work. In the product market, monopoly market or big firms or big company influence on the prices, market conditions. Suppose if any, we can focus on the labor market. Trade unions will influence on the wage rate in the real world, in the monopolistic market. Therefore, we cannot see the perfect competition market in the real world. Therefore, the classical theory was criticized on this point. So, these are the main criticisms of the classical theory. I hope you understood, and thank you for watching. This is the last part of the classical theory of output, income and employment theory. I hope you understood, and we can discuss another next concept of the macroeconomics in the next class or next videos. Thank you.